Hi everyone, Clara is here again. Today, we delve into the war between Iran, the United States, and Israel that erupted at the end of February 2026 and has quickly become one of the most dangerous geopolitical crises of the decade. What began as a coordinated American and Israeli strike on Iran has already triggered retaliation across the Middle East, drawn in outside powers, and reopened an old question that has haunted international politics for decades. Could a regional war spiral into something much bigger? At the center of the current debate is not only the battlefield itself, but also the quiet involvement of other major powers. Reports from Western intelligence sources suggest that Russia has been providing Iran with military intelligence, while China appears to be offering diplomatic and economic support. That raises the possibility that the war is not simply a Middle Eastern conflict but a proxy contest between the United States and its global rivals, particularly with China and Russia. To understand where the war might go, it is necessary to look at three questions. First, what exactly is happening on the battlefield? Second, how China and Russia are involved and what they stand to gain. Third, whether the United States risks becoming trapped in another long Middle Eastern conflict similar to Korea, Vietnam, or Afghanistan. The war began with a dramatic escalation on February 28, 2026. The United States and Israel launched a coordinated series of airstrikes targeting Iranian military and nuclear infrastructure. The stated goal was to cripple Iran's ballistic missile program and force Tehran to abandon its regional military posture. The strikes hit dozens of sites across Iran, including missile bases, drone production facilities, and command centers. According to early reports, nearly 4,000 targets were struck during the first week of the campaign. One of the most shocking developments was the reported death of nearly 50 high-rank leaders, including Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, during the strikes. This event immediately raised fears that Iran would respond with overwhelming retaliation, and Iran did retaliate, and there have been 24 rounds of counterattacks at the moment we prepared the video. Iran projected waves of ballistic missiles and military drones at U.S. bases across the Middle East and at Israeli military infrastructure. American installations in Iraq, Kuwait, and other neighboring nations in the Persian Gulf came under attack. Israeli cities were hit by missiles, triggering air defense systems across the country. The scale of the response surprised many analysts. Even after heavy bombing, Iran still had the capacity to launch hundreds of drones and missiles. What made some of these attacks particularly concerning for Washington was their accuracy. Several strikes appeared to target U.S. military positions with unusual precision. That is where Russia enters the story. According to multiple reports citing U.S. intelligence officials, Russia has been providing Iran with targeting information that could help it strike American forces in the region. The information reportedly includes the locations of U.S. warships, aircraft, and military installations. However, the U.S. side refused to comment officially on this. Sources familiar with the intelligence say Moscow has passed satellite imagery and other reconnaissance data to Tehran since the conflict began. The information could help Iranian forces locate American military assets that would otherwise be difficult to track. The United States believes this intelligence sharing may already be influencing Iranian attacks. American officials caution that there is no clear evidence that Russia is directing Iranian operations. However, the intelligence support itself represents a major geopolitical shift. It is the first indication that a nuclear-armed rival of the United States may be indirectly assisting Iran in an active war with Washington. From Moscow's perspective, the motivation is not hard to understand. Russia has been locked in a prolonged confrontation with the United States and NATO since the war in Ukraine. Washington has supplied Ukraine with billions of dollars in weapons, intelligence, and financial support. For the Kremlin, helping Iran bleed American power in the Middle East may be seen as strategic payback. There is also a practical dimension. Iran has already helped Russia during the Ukraine war by providing large numbers of drones and other weapons systems. The partnership between Moscow and Tehran has been growing for several years, culminating in a strategic cooperation agreement signed shortly before the current conflict. In that sense, Russia's intelligence support could be viewed as part of a broader military relationship rather than a sudden intervention. Another interesting part of the story is seldom mentioned, but both analysts and military fans know that China's Beidou navigation system is essential in Iran's counterattacks. Still, China's role in the conflict appears very different. It does not openly provide direct military support to Iran, at least according to publicly available information. Instead, China has focused on diplomacy, economic stability, and energy security. Chinese officials have strongly criticized the American and Israeli strikes, arguing that attacks carried out without United Nations authorization violate international law. China has also publicly supported Iran's right to defend its sovereignty and territorial integrity. At the same time, Beijing has called for an immediate ceasefire and a return to negotiations. Behind the scenes, China's involvement is largely economic. Iran is one of China's key energy partners. Chinese refineries purchase large volumes of Iranian oil, often through indirect channels that bypass Western sanctions. Ensuring that these energy supplies continue flowing is a major priority for Beijing. Reports from intelligence analysts suggest that China may also be preparing financial assistance or technical support for Iran's missile industry. However, such claims remain unconfirmed, and Beijing may never confirm that. China's approach reflects a broader strategic philosophy. Unlike Russia, which is often willing to confront the United States directly, China typically prefers indirect influence. Beijing's priority is regional stability and uninterrupted trade, especially the safe flow of oil through the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most critical energy choke points in the world. Roughly 1/5 of the global oil trade passes through this narrow waterway. If the conflict expands and the strait is blocked, the shock to the global economy would be enormous. At present, the Iranian forces reaffirmed that the strait was not blocked, but it is not open to US and Israeli ships. Geopolitically, such a crisis could benefit both China and Russia in certain ways. Higher oil prices would boost Russia's energy revenue, which has already become a central pillar of its wartime economy. Moscow has been selling oil to Asia at discounted prices, and a global energy crisis would strengthen its leverage. The US has agreed that India can continue buying Russian oil for a short time. China would benefit differently from the war. If the United States becomes deeply entangled in another Middle Eastern war, Washington's strategic focus would inevitably shift away from Asia. For years, American military planners have emphasized a pivot toward the so-called Indo-Pacific to counter China's rise. A prolonged war with Iran could delay or weaken that pivot. As we said in the previous video, Trump is trying his best to make China great again by weakening the US and alienating its allies. From Beijing's perspective, the best outcome is not necessarily an Iranian victory. Rather, it is a scenario in which the United States becomes distracted, overstretched, and politically divided. History shows that such scenarios are not rare. The United States has already experienced several long and costly conflicts that began with limited objectives but gradually expanded. The Korean War began in 1950 as an attempt to repel North Korea's invasion of the South. What followed was a brutal 3-year conflict involving China, massive casualties, and a permanent military standoff that continues to this day. The Vietnam War began as a limited effort to support the South Vietnamese government. Over time, it escalated into a massive military commitment involving more than 500,000 American troops. The war in Afghanistan started as a counterterrorism mission after the attacks of September 11, 2001. 2 decades later, the United States withdrew after one of the longest wars in its history. Each of these conflicts shared a common pattern: initial confidence in military superiority, gradual escalation, and eventually political fatigue. The Middle East has often been the most dangerous arena for this pattern because the region's conflicts are interconnected. Iran does not fight alone. Tehran has spent decades building a network of allied groups across the region. If these groups fully enter the war, the conflict could spread across multiple fronts. Israel would face missile attacks from Lebanon. Shipping in the Red Sea could come under attack. Yes, we need to say something about the Red Sea, as America's most expensive white elephant, USS Ford, is heading there. Although the US does not want to admit that it fears Iran's missiles, the fact that it runs away from the battlefield following the USS Abraham Lincoln is quite worrisome. Many may ask whether USS Ford is another sitting duck in the shallow water near Iran. The Red Sea is about 2,400 kilometers away from Tehran, and USS Ford might feel safe at such a distance away from Iran's missile attacks. There is no news showing USS Ford has been attacked by any Iranian missiles, unlike the USS Abraham Lincoln. Interestingly, whether Abraham Lincoln was damaged has become the world's top secret, and no sources from the US, China, or Russia have confirmed its current status. Trump claims he has good relations with Putin and Xi Jinping, and that may be the reason why China and Russia keep silent on this matter. As of today, there is no direct intervention by other countries. Still, such a scenario would turn the conflict into a regional war. Some signs of this escalation are already visible. Iran has launched attacks not only against Israel, but also against American bases in several countries. For the first time in history, dozens of U.S. bases in the Middle East were bombarded. At the same time, Iranian strikes have also targeted energy infrastructure and shipping routes in the Persian Gulf. These actions suggest that Iran's strategy is not to defeat the United States militarily but to impose costs across the region. In other words, Iran may be trying to make the war economically and politically unbearable for Washington and its allies. This approach is sometimes called asymmetric warfare. Instead of confronting a stronger enemy head-on, a weaker power stretches the battlefield and forces its opponent to defend multiple targets at once. For the United States, the biggest danger is not losing battles but becoming trapped in a long, expensive conflict. American military power remains overwhelming. The United States still possesses the most advanced Air Force, Navy, and intelligence capabilities in the world. However, wars are not decided by technology alone. Other factors like political will, public opinion, and economic pressure matter more than tech and military power. If the war drags on for months or years, the domestic political landscape in the United States could shift dramatically. Already, American society is deeply divided over foreign policy. Some political leaders argue that confronting Iran is necessary to maintain global stability. Others warn that the United States is repeating the mistakes of previous Middle Eastern wars. In this environment, even limited military setbacks could have large political consequences. Meanwhile, China and Russia may be watching carefully from the sidelines. Neither country appears eager to enter the war directly. But both could benefit from a prolonged conflict that weakens American influence. For Russia, a distracted United States would reduce pressure in Europe and Ukraine. For China, a United States tied down in the Middle East would have fewer resources to project power in the West Pacific. That does not mean that Beijing or Moscow want a global war. In fact, a third world war would be catastrophic for all major powers. Global trade would collapse. Nuclear risks would rise dramatically. And the economic damage would be immense. Instead, what China and Russia may prefer is a prolonged regional crisis that drains American energy without escalating into a confrontation between nuclear powers. This kind of indirect rivalry has a long history. During the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union rarely fought each other directly. Instead, they supported opposing sides in conflicts around the world. Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan, Angola, Central America. The current war in the Middle East shows some similarities to those earlier proxy conflicts. The United States and Israel are directly fighting Iran. Russia may be providing intelligence support. China may be providing diplomatic and economic backing. Each side is trying to advance its interests without triggering a full-scale confrontation between great powers. Whether this delicate balance can hold is the biggest question. If Iran strikes a major American base and kills large numbers of troops, Washington could escalate dramatically. Donald Trump is considering the possibility of sending special forces to Iran, and many netizens are apparently looking forward to that. If Israel launches deeper attacks into Iran's political leadership or nuclear infrastructure, Tehran could respond with even larger missile showers. If Hezbollah or other regional forces enter the war fully, Israel could face a multi-front conflict. Any of these scenarios could push the war beyond its current limits. Iran has hinted that its strike has no limits, potentially including U.S. military assets in the Philippines, Japan, South Korea, Guam, and even the America proper. Yet there are also reasons to believe the conflict may remain contained. Iran understands that a direct war with the United States carries enormous risks. Israel, despite its military strength, must consider the possibility of prolonged missile attacks on its cities. The United States is aware that another endless Middle Eastern war would be deeply unpopular at home. Even Russia and China are likely to prefer a limited conflict to a global escalation. For now, the war sits in a dangerous middle ground. It is already larger than a simple bilateral conflict. But it has not yet crossed the threshold into a full regional war. The next few weeks determine which direction it goes. If diplomatic channels reopen and a ceasefire emerges, the conflict could slowly cool. If retaliation continues and new actors join the fight, the Middle East could once again become the center of a global power struggle. One lesson from history is clear. Wars that begin with confidence often end with uncertainty. And the longer they last, the more unpredictable they become. Whether this war becomes another long chapter in Middle Eastern conflict or the beginning of something far larger will depend not only on the decisions made in Washington, Tehran, and Jerusalem, but also on the quiet calculations in Beijing and Moscow. For now, the world is watching and hoping that the crisis stops short of the unthinkable.